All right. Welcome to Black Swan Revelations Live. Nothing like a little bit of product placement. Just having a little bit of Black Swan coffee here. So tonight, my goal is to try not to spill my coffee on my Bible or anything. So we're going to be talking about Peter, Andrew, James, and John going fishing. And I hope this will be interesting to you. I've always been kind of fascinated with this story, and we're just going to take our time on this one. I'm going to pull up a few verses, and it's all going to be related to when Jesus first asked Peter, Andrew, James, and John to follow him, and what the scenario was, because they were fishing. And then also I'm going to be talking about the resurrection and what was going on when the boys are at it again. They're going fishing. So we're going to be talking about that. And I think hopefully it'll be insightful, because the goal is to try and share with you perhaps something new, maybe look at it from a different angle, something that maybe you never thought about when it comes to reading the Gospels. And I'm just finishing up. As soon as I'm done I'm in the Gospel of Luke right now. As soon as I'm done the Gospel of John, I am done the New Testament. I started in June 7th. And then I'm going to dive into the Old Testament. I'm going to start right at the beginning and then just go all the way through the Old Testament. So I've slowed down a little bit. Slow down. See what's going on. What's going on, Gary and Angina? Welcome. Love you guys. And Billy Jank. Prophetic Echoes with Watchdog Billy Jank. Wow. That's a fantastic channel name. Love it. Okay. So let's cut the music. All right. I'll try to keep an eye on my comments as best I can. Sometimes it's hard when you're navigating alone here. All right, let's jump into this. Here's some of the verses we're going to be covering. We're going to dive into Luke, a little bit of Matthew, a little bit of Mark, a little bit of John, and we're going to try and tie it up with a nice little bow. So let's dive into Luke chapter 5. Hopefully you guys can hear me all right. I've tried to make it a little bit more room for me so I can read my physical Bible instead of always going to Bible Gateway, which I don't mind. I use it all the time, but sometimes it's just I can find my way around a little bit better in my Bible. So let's go to Fishermen Follow Jesus. I think this is also one reason why I like this particular King James Bible. There's no commentary, but the headings are pretty nice. Like every chapter it has, like, for example, chapter 4, the temptation of Jesus. Jesus preaches in Nazareth, a spirit of an unclean devil, Jesus healing ministry, and fishermen follow Jesus. I like that because it just gives you a little snapshot of what you're about to read. And that also helps me to find things a lot faster than a Bible that doesn't have any of these titles. So chapter 5, and it came to pass that as the people pressed upon him to hear the word of God, he stood by the lake of Gennesaret and saw two ships Not one ship, not three, not four, two ships standing by the lake. But the fishermen were gone out of them and were washing their nets, cleaning their nets. Two boats. And he entered into one of the ships, which was Simon's, whom we later find out that this is Peter, and prayed him that he would thrust out a little from the land. And he sat down and taught the people out of the ship. Now, I've done some fishing in my time, commercial fishing with my dad. I used to fish with nets in Lac La Biche with my brother from time to time. My brother would help us out as well. So it'd be my dad, my brother Dustin, and myself out on the lake at an ungodly hour, sometimes 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning when you're like 15, 16 years old. Yeah, that's crazy time, especially if you're out partying hard the night before and you still got to get up and go fishing. It's crazy, right? So we would go out and we would have to take the truck to the shore and the boat would be there and we'd fill it up with all the nets and everything that we had, the buoys, everything. And the idea was we would take this boat out onto the lake. And then as we're going along with the motorboat, we would string net out of the boat and you could go hundreds of yards with these nets and they would have buoys so that the next day, usually it was usually the next day or two, you come back. And then what we would do is we would pull in the fish into the boat. It felt very reminiscent of what was going on here in Galilee. So when I see Jesus telling Simon, to thrust the boat out, if somebody sits in the boat, it's actually a little bit harder to push the boat out. Usually what happens is both guys go on either side of the boat and they go to push it out, and then you jump in the boat real quick before you get wet and everything. But in this case, Jesus went in, sat in the boat, and asked Peter to thrust it. You got to give it a good push to get it out onto the water so that Jesus can begin to teach. Hello, Pambolina. Can you, just trying to think, what was I going to ask? Are you able to, as my admin, can you bring up people's comments as we go as well? I'm not sure if you can. Because you're a mod, I don't know if you have that access to be able to bring up comments or if you can just punt people. I can't remember. But if you can, that would be cool. If you can't, that's okay. I will try and do it. Maybe one day. Okay. Maybe one day what I'll do is I'll add you, I think internally. I think there's a way to do it internally so that you could bring up the verses as I mention them, or the comments, I should say, as we mention them, something like that. We'll figure something out. Appreciate your help. Yeah, I think maybe perhaps you have to be inside or something, but I'll figure that out. All right. We are on verse 3. All right, thrust out from the land, and he sat down and taught the people out of the ship. Now, when he had left speaking, this is all finished, he said unto Simon, launch out into the deep, and let your net out for a drought. So basically to create a drag so that the fish can obviously swim into it. Again, what we saw before is the fishermen were on the shore washing their nets. And this will become important later. So why do you wash your nets? Usually it's because you have junk that you caught, like you could have caught twigs, sticks, branches, whatever else that could get caught in the net. So it's important to clean it off, and then you can wrap it nicely after you clean it all off, because the worst thing is to wrap a net with all that stuff in it, and then it dries, and then it's going to tangle the net. And believe me, I've spent hours trying to untangle nets, and it's not fun. It's not fun. You end up tearing the net and all kinds of stuff. So I think washing the net would signify that's kind of the last thing that you would do, is wash the net, get it all ready to store it in the boat, and then you call it a night. You're done. Meanwhile, Jesus is saying, launch out into the deep and let down your nets for a draught. And Simon answering said unto him, Master, we, meaning the four of them, Andrew and Peter in one boat, James and John in one boat. We know they fished together in pairs. Simon answering said unto him, Master, we have toiled all night, all the night, so all night, and have taken nothing. So they're washing these nets because they're empty. The alternative to washing your nets is to fix the nets. Why? Because you usually either you had a good catch or something happened that you ripped your nets, and you got to fix them before you start. Because the idea is when you take off in the morning, you just want to jump in the boat and go. You don't want to be fixing the nets in the morning. You fix them when you're done, is usually how it works. Or another day, perhaps on a weekend or whatever, you take your net back home and you fix them. You mend the nets. So we have taken nothing. Nevertheless, at thy word, I will let down the net. And when they had this done, they enclosed a great multitude of fishes, and their net brake. So they created a drought, which is basically, if you think about it, they could do it with two boats easily. Two boats going out side by side with a net in between them, and then they're just capturing everything, and then they enclose, and then they start bringing in the net into their boats. That's one technique, instead of just, because otherwise it wouldn't make any sense. If you're trying to capture fish, the one way is what we would do, and that is take it far out onto a lake and then string it for hundreds of yards, so that if schools of fish are going this way, they would get caught. But in this scenario, what was happening was they were going out with the net, and then they were enclosing the fish, and they caught so many that their nets began to break, which is interesting. And they beckon unto their partners, which were in the other ship, that they should come and help them. And they came and filled both ships, so that they began to sink. So what's interesting here is, if you think about how ships are built and designed and all this kind of stuff, basically the idea is the ship basically displaces water. So that's why you can't sink a ship as long as the volume inside the boat is equal or greater than outside of the boat, meaning like when we're talking about displacing something, you'll never be able to sink that boat unless you surpass that volume inside the boat. I don't know how else to say it. I'm not a rocket surgeon. So if you have a body in there, or two bodies, and you have a bunch of fish, there's only so much weight that you can take. And usually, if you think about a boat of this size, a fishing boat, not a boat where you're just paddling away for leisure, it's built to handle weight. So typically, these fishing boats can handle two men, and you could fill the boat to a decent level, and you're okay. But these boats began to sink, both of them. Both boats began to sink And if you're a fisherman, you know what's next. You lose your boats and you lose all the fish that you have. And then perhaps you could drown as well. You can get entangled into the nets and it could become a serious thing. But in this case, I think it was more of excitement as well. Like imagine your boat overflowing with fish so much that it's beginning to sink, and I can see them wanting to make it to shore before they lose both their ships. That's how much fish they have. Tons of fish. Not tons of fish. Probably hundreds of pounds worth of fish. So they beckoned unto their partners, and when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, Depart from me. I am a sinful man, O Lord. For he was astonished, and all that were with him, at the draught of the fishes they had taken. And so was also James and John, the sons of Zebedee, which were partners with Simon. And Jesus said unto Simon, Fear not, from henceforth thou shalt catch men. And when they had brought their ships to land, they forsook all and followed him. That's a lot of money right there. If you go back in time to about that time frame, if you were to pay for a boat that was that size, you could easily be looking at a year's salary or more in order to provide for a boat of that size. Now, these aren't gigantic boats, but they're fishing boats. And if you lose a boat like that, it's going to cost you at least a year's salary. And then when you think about it from the perspective of fish, there's different sizes in the Lake of Galilee where they were fishing. There's basically, you could look at it as basically three different types of fish. I'm trying to think what the first kind is. I should have wrote it down. There's three kinds. There's the smaller kind where people eat and they can take to the food market. And basically each one of these fish would be equivalent to almost a day's wage. So that tells you how valuable fish was and how important it was for these men in the fishing industry. It wasn't like just going out with a rod and grabbing a fish and then you're okay. These guys were experts. They use a net and all that kind of stuff. So you can argue half a day's wage to a day's wage. This would be typical for the size of fish that these guys were catching. This becomes important later when we talk about Jesus meeting up with these four disciples who were again going back to their occupation after Jesus was seen raised from the dead. All right, so let's go to another verse here. Let's go to Matthew 4, verse 18. Matthew 4:18. So sometimes you don't pick this stuff up if you just read a verse a day. I don't know how you can do it, honestly. I don't know how you can do it. So if you read a verse a day, you might be thinking you're getting something, but you're going to miss all this cool stuff. So in Matthew 4, verse 18, we see Jesus calling the first four disciples. But what's interesting in the Gospel of Matthew kind of skips over the part where Jesus is on the water sharing and then tells Peter to thrust his boat onto the water. We basically come upon Jesus where he's walking by the Sea of Galilee. He saw two brethren, Simon called Peter and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishers. So they're fishing here. And this feels like that this is the first instance of where Jesus meets these gentlemen. And look what they're doing here. It says here, and he saith unto them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Reminiscent of what Jesus said in Luke chapter 5. It's the same idea. Come follow me. So the question is, how many times did Jesus say this to Peter, Andrew, James, and John? I would submit to you that he said it one time, but we're getting a little bit of a different perspective, that these fishermen are casting their nets out, and he saith unto them, follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men. And they straightway left their nets and followed him. So for all we know, they could have been cleaning their nets after the great catch. And going on from thence, he saw two other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, in a ship with Zebedee, their father, mending their nets. Why? Because they broke. Why? Because Jesus just finished telling them to cast their nets out like a drought and enclose them. So here we see that they're mending their nets. So again, this tells me that this is just after Jesus just finished telling them to throw their nets into the water. And they immediately left the ship and their father and followed him. And then we see the healing ministry begins. So this is all we get in Matthew. Hopefully you can see that we're starting to put a little puzzle together here. So now let's go to Mark. Mark chapter 1. Look at this. Let's go to Mark chapter 1, verse 16 to 20. Verse 14. Now, after that John was put in prison, Jesus came into Galilee, preaching the gospel of the kingdom of God, and saying, the time is fulfilled, and the kingdom of God is at hand. Repent ye and believe in the gospel. So again, this is the gospel according to Mark. This is Mark's rendition. And as he walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishers. So in Luke, we see that they had been fishing all night, and then now they were washing their nets because they're basically done. Here we see Jesus seeing them fishing. So that doesn't necessarily mean that he went right up to them to talk to them right away. That's what we assume, that there's no time. But in the Gospel of Luke, we see a bit more time frame, but this is the same time because Jesus is calling them. He walked by the Sea of Galilee, and he saw Simon and Andrew and his brother casting a net into the sea, for they were fishers. Jesus said unto them, come ye after me, and I will make you to become fishers of men. And straightway they forsook their nets and followed him. And when he had gone a little farther, he saw James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, who were also in the ship mending their nets. And straightway he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the ship with their hired servants and went after him. So now we have three instances of, to me, seems logical that this is the same story. It's just got a little bit of a different viewpoint. Jesus sees these people fishing. In Luke, he asked Peter to thrust the boat out, and Peter's kind of like, I've been doing this all day. And here you can kind of get that snapshot that that's what they were doing as Jesus was walking along the shore. But Mark chose to not add in any more detail, which is fine. He didn't have to repeat the same story exactly word for word, but I think they're trying to give us a little bit of a snapshot of what was going on. And if you read all four Gospels, which is what I do every time now, I don't just read Mark and then go back to the Old Testament or go to the Pauline epistles. I always read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John together, like one after another, because you're going to see these stories pop up, and then all of a sudden you're going to get a different angle. You're going to be like, oh, he said, come follow me on three different snapshots in three different Gospels, but it's the same time frame. It's the same story. Otherwise, it would seem weird to call Peter one day and then the next day call Andrew and then the next day call James and then the next day call John. That's not what we're getting when we're reading these three Gospels. We're getting the idea that this is getting closer to a time frame of when this happened. All right, let me continue here. So now let's go to John chapter 21. This is where it gets kind of interesting. John 21. Hopefully you guys are getting something out of this tonight. I always get something different every time I read the Bible. There's always something that jumps out. All right. Let's go to John chapter 21, verse 1 to 14. After these things, so this is after Jesus rose from the dead, and he told Thomas, hey, stick your finger in my side, stick your finger in the holes in my hands, and blessed are they that don't see and believe. Excuse me. After these things, Jesus shewed himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias, and on this wise showed he himself. So John begins to tell the story of how Jesus showed himself to Simon Peter. There were together Simon Peter and Thomas called Didymus and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and two other of his disciples. Simon Peter saith unto them, I go fishing. And they said unto him, we also go with thee. So now we get an idea of who these fishermen are. Peter, Thomas, Nathanael, the two sons of Zebedee, and two of his other disciples. And I think one of them would be Andrew. And I'm just looking here, and most likely someone else. Don't know who the other person would be. So verse 3, and Peter said unto them, I go fishing. Okay, and they say unto him, we also go with thee. And they went forth and entered into a ship immediately, and that night they caught nothing. So imagine this. Jesus Christ, the King of Israel, died and left and rose again. And they're like, well, I guess that was that. That was a fun ride for 3.5 years. Man, we saw everything. I guess let's just go back to our former occupation. Let's go back to work. Almost like this didn't happen. It's like that whole experience of learning under Jesus Christ for 3.5 years was, well, that's it. Hey, guys, you want to go fishing? I'll go with you. I'll go fishing. So they take off, and they catch nothing, which basically brings us back to the loop of when Jesus first met them, and he said, cast your net out onto the water. And what did he tell them? He said, come and follow me. I will make you fishers of men. And Peter said, depart from me, I'm a sinner. Back then. So imagine they go out fishing, and it had to have been like deja vu for them at night. They're looking at each other as they're pulling the net, wondering if they're bringing in any fish. And they're probably thinking and talking, remember when Jesus told us to go back in. Remember when I said, Master, we're fishing all night, and they're probably, yeah, I remember that. That was a good haul. Busted our nets and everything, and we had a hard time explaining to our father that we had to leave and go follow this guy. But we left our father in a good space because he was rich almost overnight. So they're probably reminiscing about stories about what Jesus did and how he broke bread and fed 5,000 and all these people and fed them fish like crazy. And then when he saw Thomas and he saw all the disciples in the room, he's like, give me something to eat. They gave him something to eat. They're probably talking about that stuff through the wee hours of the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, and they're not catching anything. Not catching anything. But when the morning was now come, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples knew not that it was Jesus. And it's possible, especially when it's at dawn, like in the morning, early in the morning. It's very difficult to see because of fog and all kinds of conditions. It's dark out. Your eyes might be still trying to adjust because you've been working in the dark all night long. And then you see somebody in the shore and you're not even thinking that this is Jesus. Then Jesus saith unto them, Children, have ye any meat? And they answered him, No. And he said unto them, Cast the net on the right side of the ship, and ye shall find. They cast therefore now, and now they were not able to draw it for the multitude of fishes. So think about this. The first story we see is they were able to pull the fish into the boat, meaning these were smaller fishes, but in a huge abundance. It's nothing to pull them into the boat, but because of the sheer volume, not mass, volume of the fish, the two boats began to sink and they had to get to shore, and it was tearing their nets. And now they were not able to draw it, so they couldn't even bring it into the boat. Therefore, that disciple whom Jesus loved saith unto Peter, It is the Lord. And this is John saying this. Now when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he girt his fisher's coat onto him, for he was naked. Kind of an interesting side note there, that's what these guys do. And cast himself into the sea. And the other disciples came in a little ship. Remember, we kind of get a number of how many disciples are there that are fishing. For they were not far from the land, but as it were 200 cubits. So it's interesting because we're getting a perspective of a little bit more accuracy because John is the one writing this account. He's an eyewitness. He saw what was happening. So he gave us a little bit more of an accurate description. He said, but as it were 200 cubits, dragging the net with fishes. So they couldn't bring it into the boat. It was too heavy for them to even get this net out of the water. As soon then as they were come to the land, they saw a fire of coals there, and fish laid thereon, and bread. And Jesus saith unto them, Bring of the fish which ye have now caught. Simon Peter went up and drew the net to the land full of great fishes, 153. For all there were so many, and yet there was not the net broken. So let's just think about this for a second here. 153 fish. These are great fishes. So what are great fishes? There's there's catfish. What's the big one? Oh, what are they called? Let me just find it real quick. Let me see. So basically, you have the St. Peter's fish, which is kind of interesting. That's the tilapia. And basically, they're small fish, probably like this, kind of like this. This is what I was saying, like a day's wage. That's typical. So this species is native in Galilee. So this is the common fish, if you will. And then there was also catfish, which are kind of a medium, small to medium. But these are the fish that would be responsible for tearing your net. What do I mean? Well, because they dwell on the floor, if you catch them in your net is going to get drugged down to rocks and everything else. And when you're pulling the net, you're pulling these fish that are caught in the net at the lowest part and thus dragging along the rocks, and your net could break, it could tear, all this kind of stuff. So that would be small to medium fish. Then you have the sardines as well. Not sardines. What are they called? Yeah, sardines, I guess. Let's see here. They were also abundant. But what I want is the great fishes. What were they called? I forget what they're called. Coming up. These are name. Let's see. They are trying to see if I can find them. Dun, 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 dun. What are they called? Sometimes they call them Goliath grouper. So they're known for their larger size, roughly. So these great fishes could be anywhere from, if you think about the St. Peter's fish being a couple of pounds, these greater fish are anywhere from 8 to 11, 8 to 12 pounds. So 3, 4, 5 times their size. And these are great fish. That's what these fishermen caught. And think about it. The fish were so great, and probably because they're still alive and still moving, that they couldn't pull them into the boat. But what's really interesting is the nets never break. The nets never broke. I think that sounds right. Sounds weird. They did not break. That's part of the miracle as well. Because remember, the little fishes broke the net and there was an abundance, but these are great fishes. And this, if you're talking about wealth, you're talking about 5 to 10 times more wages for these fish. So let me just figure this out real quick. How much would that be? Let's see if I can figure this out. Can I figure it out? What are we looking at here? So you're probably looking at Well, for sure, 153 days' wages, if you think about it. If the normal fish are about a day's wage, say Peter's fish, and you quadruple this with these great fish, which are known to be, like I said, 10 to 12 pounds, you just made Peter, James, John, and Andrew, and the other two disciples, Thomas and Nathaniel, wealthy instantaneously by catching these big fish. Why? Because in that day and age, fish wasn't always easy to catch. Not like this. We already saw two instances of where these fishermen are willing to go out, and 6, maybe 8 of them went out all night and never caught anything. That sounds like that could be typical, where you go out one night, you catch a few fish, you go out another night, you're blanked. You catch nothing. And then maybe you might get into a run where you get 1, 2, 3 days in a row where you get fish, but not like this. This is why it's called a miracle. Do you understand that? It's a miracle. Miracles don't happen every single day, just like Black Swan events don't happen every single day. So once you start thinking about that this was a big deal, it was a miracle because these great fish were caught, and you can argue day and night as to how big these fish were. We know that they were bigger than the St. Peter's fish, which were tiny. Again, probably like this. Average would be like a pound or 2. But if you're not used to catching fish in that area, usually what people do is they move on to somewhere else. But if you think about the market where they're buying fish, the further out you go, the less the fish are worth. Why? Because they rot. They probably didn't have a deep freezer. They probably didn't have igloos. And like we do, we have igloos everywhere in our backyard to preserve things. So the further you go, your fish are going to be rotten. You'd almost have to eat them within a day. And if you travel more than a day's walk, how many fish do you honestly think that you can carry back to the market? So again, this is a miracle because we got fresh fish. Imagine pulling up to the market with 153 giant fish. What do you think the people are going to buy your fish versus the other ones that have flies all over them because they came over from Tyre and Sidon, and they smell and they're rotten and they got dirt and all kinds of crap all over them, versus fresh fish brought in from the Sea of Galilee minutes ago, hours ago? How much do you think the value would be for those fish? It's going to skyrocket. Rich almost overnight. Crazy, right? Crazy. All right. 46 minutes. Not too bad. What do you guys think, right? And then we get into feeding the sheep and all that stuff, where basically Jesus forgives Peter. But look at this here. Came in, as soon as they come in, they saw Jesus, and they said, "Bring of the fish which ye have now caught." And meanwhile, he had fish and bread. Simon Peter went up and drew the net to land, and 153. There's so many, yet the net didn't break. And Jesus said, "Come and dine." And none of the disciples durst ask him, "Who art thou?" Knowing that it was the Lord. Jesus then cometh and taketh the bread and giveth them, and fish likewise. And this is now the 3rd time that Jesus shewed himself to his disciples after that he was risen from the dead. All right. So that's it for tonight. Hopefully you got something out of that. I know we got a lot of comments I think people went on a different direction, which is fine. Talking about whatever else, Ezekiel 47, all this kind of stuff. But hey, that's the beauty of going live. We have people that have ADD and all kinds of stuff, and they can't focus on one story or one topic. That's fine. That's fine. But I hope you get something out of this, that the idea that this was a miracle. And if you think about it from the perspective of the disciples who were down and out because they thought Jesus was going to restore the kingdom back to Israel. That's what they were hoping. Like, he just finished riding in on a colt into Jerusalem. And after that, they sealed it, which is another story, because people are waiting for the Messiah to go through the gate. But I would argue with you that the Messiah already went through the gate the first time. That was on a colt, I should say. And then it's all sealed up, which is interesting. That would be another video. But I hope you got something out of this. Hope you did, because I love reading the scriptures. I love taking time to read this stuff. And again, I hope you enjoy it as well. Have a fantastic night, and I'll see you. No, we can't go out on that one. No. That one's not bad. How about this one? There we go. We'll go out on that one. All right, thanks, guys. Have a good night. See you in another video. You know what's interesting is when you talk about Jesus riding on a colt, we're talking about a young foal, a young donkey, if you will. And who's the guy? What was his name? Can't even remember his name. He has a channel. He's just constantly slamming Christians all the time. Jewish guy, non-Messianic Jew, always coming at Jews. I've talked about him sometimes in my video, but he was of the thought that Jesus was riding on two animals, the mother, if you will, and then the young colt, because he's like, this doesn't make any sense. So Jesus must be doing the splits on these two mules going into Jerusalem, because they're so silly. Why would he ride two at the same time? Well, my dear scholar, wherever the mother goes, the colt would follow. That's just the way it works. Because if you think about it, if you go back into the Old Testament, the Philistines were getting their knackers basically their tender bits down there, if you will. They had tumors. You want to talk about people with kahunas? The Philistines had kahunas because they had the ark and they were suffering badly. Probably had hemorrhoids as well. There was no such thing as preparation H back then for the poor Philistines. So they had hemorrhoids and they had their gonads that were the size of bowling balls. And they're like, you got to send this ark back. And they're like, how can we do this? How do we know that this is of God, or how do we know that this is just some random act? Then one of their priests said, tell you what we should do. Let's get 2 cows, 2 female cows, not bulls, females, that have been nursing their cows, their calves. And what I want you to do is put a yoke on them and have a wagon attached to them and tie their calves back home so that they can't follow their mothers, and let them go. And if they go all the way to, I think it was to Milo, where basically the temple was going to be built, if they go straight there, we know this is an act of God. So the 2 cows went almost in a straight line, and they were mooing and everything. Why? Because they wanted to be with their young calves. But the Lord was making them go to, is it Shiloh, Milo, and where the Temple Mount was going to be in the future. And when they got there, the Israelites broke out in a cheer, and then the Philistines realized that it was a miracle because the cows left their young ones. So that's something to think about. And then in this case, there were 2. There was a donkey, and then there was the colt, the young one. I don't know what they're called. Baby donkey. Is that easier for you? And Jesus rode on the young one. And the disciples, not the city, the disciples actually put out their cloaks. And remember, there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of disciples in 3.5 years. We just think of 12. But it's actually, we know for a fact it's at least 70 disciples. But you needed more to have the city in an uproar, wondering what in the world is going on when they see the Messiah coming through the eastern gate riding on a colt. That's fulfilling prophecy as well. And they're all in an uproar. And then the disciples had to explain to them, this is Jesus of Nazareth that we told you about. Cool, eh? Anyways. Yeah, exactly. They needed to be milked. So he didn't stick to fish economics. Yeah, it's still a mystery with the 153. It's still a mystery. Man, I've sat down and I'm like, I've heard it all with regards to 153. I still don't have an answer yet that is satisfying for me as to why the 153. Other than it was a miracle. It was a big deal. The nets didn't break. These are huge fish. And again, if you think about it, if John is writing the gospel, and if you're used to paying attention to something like this as a fisherman, you're going to have the biggest fish story ever to tell someone. It was, how many fish did you catch? I caught 153. How many fish did he say, Peter? 153. That was a big deal. It's not like we just caught a few. They counted it. All of them. They probably couldn't believe how many fish they caught instantaneously. So maybe that's the significance. I don't know. Anyways, that's it for tonight. Hope you guys got something out of this. The next video is going to be on Sunday, and we're going to have a special guest as well for the first time on our channel, so that should be fun. And then, of course, we'll have the usual suspects, myself. Hopefully, Gary Gates could show up. And then I think usually it's Bob, myself, and then so we got myself, Bob, Gary, and then mystery guest, and then someone else. Maybe my sister, maybe Amy Moosefelt, girl who loves Jesus. We haven't had her on for a while. So, Amy, if you're up late at night and you're watching this, we want you on Sunday night show. And it's actually earlier. It's at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Mountain Standard Time, which would be most likely 5 o'clock in the East. So still early. Still early for you guys. Anyways, have a good night, and I will see you guys in another video. Bye for now. See you on Sunday.